This lesson is going to cover quotation marks. These are quotation marks right here around I have a dream. So the first thing you want to understand is the difference between a direct quote and an indirect quote. So a direct quote means that you copied someone's words verbatim. And verbatim means in exactly the same words, word for word, basically dot for dot. So when you put something in quotation marks, it means that you copied it from another source, word for word. If it's an indirect quote, then you're summarizing or paraphrasing the information from the source, and that means that you're looking away from it and putting it into your own words and really your own sentence structure. So both paraphrasing and summary writing require that you understand the information so well that you can have a conversation about it without referencing back to it constantly. Let's look at an example. So here's an example. The cat asks, "Hey, do you all want to form a study group?" So somebody says, "What did she say?" And the first person responds by directly quoting the cat. She said, "Hey, do you all want to form a study group?" So notice that she has it word for word. The second cat, though, says she wants to know if we want to study together. She summarized the information from the original source instead. So again, direct quote means that you copy word for word and you put that information in quotation marks. When you put it in your own wording and sentence structure, it's a summary. The next part that you want to become familiar with is the signal phrase. The signal phrase introduces the quote, the source of the quote. The first time a source is introduced, we want to establish the source's credibility. So I've color coded the slide in the same way. The signal phrase introduces the source. So the signal phrase here is according to Carol Dweck. And because Carol Dweck is the author of the quote that is in purple. So the red part then is establishing her credibility. We don't want to assume that the reader knows who Carol Dweck is. That would be unfair. So in order to establish her credibility as somebody I would want to quote directly, I establish who she is. So here it says, professor of psychology at Stanford University and author of Mindset, the New Psychology of Success. So from that, my readers will be able to determine that, number one, she teaches at Stanford University, which is a high-end, an upper-level university, and that she's also a published author. And then we get to the quoted part here. So let's look at some other options for signal phrase. So when we continue to cite Professor Dweck in our paper, we don't have to introduce her each time by saying that she works at Stanford, or she's a professor at Stanford University and that she's an author. All we have to do then is refer to the author by the last name. So here in the second one, if I was summarizing and partially quoting something she said, Dweck points out that people with a fixed mindset want their partner to treat them like they are perfect. They want to be put on a pedestal. And so here I've summarized mostly what she says on page 11 there, and I quote the word pedestal because I took that word directly from the page. So again, the key concept here is that if I decide to introduce Professor Dweck in another paragraph, another section of my paper, I no longer have to introduce who she is. I've introduced her once, and that's all I need. And from here on out, MLA just wants you to use the author's last name for the rest of the signal phrases. So some options for signal phrases would be according to Dweck. Dweck points out, as Dweck noted, Dweck claims, or Dweck reports. In a recent Washington Post article, Dweck reports. As you read your research articles, you might want to highlight the signal phrases used so that you can use them as examples in your own writing. Here's a list of verbs that you can use when you're writing signal phrases. You don't have to get too fancy about this. The key is not to get the fanciest verb possible. It's the best verb to introduce the information. The next step here is understanding the placement of the signal phrase. You have three options, and it's nice to have options because if you always put the signal phrase at the beginning, it could be a little dull. Maybe not. But anyway, you have three options, and so let's look at those. The beginning, the end, or split. So if you see here, Dweck explains, I just used the same signal phrase each time in all four options here. So here we have the signal phrase at the beginning, Dweck explains, and then here's the direct quote. Notice then that we entered the signal phrase is here. A comma separates the signal phrase from the direct quote. And then the period here is on the inside of the quotation marks. On number 2, we've put the signal phrase at the end of the direct quote. And so here we start with the quote, we end. Again, we're still using a comma to separate the signal phrase from the direct quote. Notice that when it's at the signal phrase is at the end, the comma is inside the quotation marks. And then the final period goes here. Now, when we get to split quotes, these tend to be the most difficult ones to understand. So here we have 2 split quotes, and split means that we've got the speaker now in the middle. So again, in number 1, we had the speaker at the beginning. Number 2, we had speaker at the end. Now we have speaker in the middle, but they're in the middle on both 3 and 4. So what's the difference? The difference here is that in number 3, you're going to see that the blue starts with people in a growth mindset don't just seek challenge, they thrive on it. So you see that the blue crosses the signal phrase. It goes from challenge over to here, and the reason for that is the blue is all one sentence. We just dropped the signal phrase into part wherever we thought that it smoothly dropped into the sentence. People in a growth mindset don't just seek challenge, explains Dweck. They thrive on it. The key here again is that we dropped it into one single sentence. People in a growth mindset don't just seek challenge, they thrive on it. That's one single sentence, and we just dropped the signal phrase into that one single sentence. In number 4, you're going to notice that the blue is not interrupted by the signal phrase. Okay. The reason for that is that this signal phrase, explains Dweck, is dividing 2 complete sentences. The information in red here is a complete sentence. People in a growth mindset don't just seek challenge, they thrive on it. The sentence ends here because a new sentence begins here. The bigger the challenge, the more they stretch. So the difference here between 3 and 4 is that notice here that the signal phrase here is divided by 2 commas. A comma here and a comma here. And the reason there are 2 commas is because this, from challenge to they, continues this sentence. The sentence is continued on this side. So it wouldn't make sense to have a period here. On this side, you're going to see that the signal phrase is divided by a comma and a period. A comma and a period. And the reason for that is the signal phrase always stays with the first sentence, the quoted part, here. So we end it here. People in a growth mindset don't just seek challenge, they thrive on it, explains Dweck. That ends that sentence, and the second quote is here. The reader understands that they're still connected to Dweck, but this first sentence we have to end because it's the end of a thought. Okay, so you're going to practice these skills. The comma and the period go on the inside of the quotation marks. This would be a good guide for you from the page. So notice that it's correct here to put the period inside the quotation marks. If I have this is called a parenthetical citation. This 54 in parentheses. We'll get to that later. But when I have a parenthetical citation, then the parenthetical citation is part of this sentence, just not part of the quote. And so the final period goes here. And then it is incorrect to put it on the outside. In B here it says, unless they are part of the original quotation, all marks other than commas or periods are placed outside the quotation marks. So in this case, you're going to see here that the semicolon, because it's not a comma or a period, stays outside. This inside would be incorrect. Here, when we have talking about questions, when you're trying to decide if a question mark should be on the inside or the outside, what you want to ask yourself is the quote here a question? It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. That's not a question. The question comes outside the quote. Wasn't it Dickens who wrote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times? And that's why the quotation mark here is on the outside. Oops. That made me dizzy. Okay, sorry about that. All right, so blended quotes are another option. So a blended quote means I take a piece of a sentence from the source that my research, and I just blend it into my own sentence. So here we have, according to Falk's study, dreams may express, quote, profound aspects of personality. So if I can blend it. So all of this information is mine. I wrote this part, and then the direct quote came from the source. So that's a blended quote. Ellipsis is used, is 3 dots here, 3 periods essentially. And we use those to indicate to the reader that when we started quoting "we're" up here, we quoted from here to here. When we got to making, we left out maybe one word, maybe 3 words, maybe 5 sentences. It doesn't matter. We've left out information and then continued the quote. But we've left out information from the original quote and then continued it here. Notice that this is the final period here. Ellipsis is a dot, a space, a dot, a space, a dot, and a space. So they're not touching. Brackets. Brackets are these here in red, these little brackets right here. And those are used when we're using somebody else's quote if we need to add a word or add information to the quote to make it read correctly. Then we do that with brackets. So this means right here that in these 2 authors, their quote, this R was not there, but in your essay, it's needed to make that read smoothly. Long quotes or block quotes are terms that you want to become familiar with. So here you'll see when for quotations that are more than 4 lines of prose or 3 lines of verse, place quotations in a freestanding block of text and omit the quotation marks. So notice down here that there are no quotation marks starting here and ending here. And the reason is because of the way that this is indented, the reader automatically knows that this information is quoted by this massive indent right here. So you know how you use the tab key once to indent a paragraph? For a long quote or block quote, you would hit the tab key twice to indent the block quote. So you do want to also introduce the quote. So here in blue, you'll see that we've introduced the quote right here. I can't just drop it into the essay. You want to introduce it in some way. And then this part, again, we'll get to later, is a parenthetical citation. It identifies the source of the information. So for direct and indirect quotations for academic writing, a couple things you want to keep in mind. When you're writing an academic essay, if you look back at a paragraph or an essay and it's largely contains just a whole bunch of direct quotes, you have a problem. That's not what we're expecting for college level writing. For college level writing, we're expecting you to summarize the information from your sources as much as possible, because putting it into your own words actually requires work. It requires you to formulate the information in your own brain and put it out in different wording and different structure, sentence structure. So you want to limit your direct quotes to quotes that are so powerful that summarizing them would somehow change the flavor of the way the reader would see it or hear it. So think about that when you're using quotes in your academic writing. Here's your next practice exercise. So here you're going to create a Google document titled Signal Phrases. You're going to click on the number icon, which is this. So it numbers your sentences. You're going to write a total of 7 sentences and write them in the same order listed below. So it's I can grade them faster, essentially, is why. So there's a list of direct